if I understood the Bible the way I do now, I would be very successful in law enforcement, especially God's sovereignty. The outcome is God's. When I that was first explained to me, I was shocked. I was blown away. Like, wait a minute, this weight of like things that were not my responsibility to carry was gone.
Hello and welcome to the March or Die Show. Very glad to have you with me. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker. I am your host, and this is the show where every single episode we talk about principles and perspectives that are necessary to help us to move forward in our lives, to march when it would be easier to simply stay where we are and die. We talk about that every week, and today have a great guest on who is going to tell his story and talk about how he learned to move forward in his life, and we'll get to that in just a second. Before we do, however, if you have not subscribed, please do that right now. Wherever you're listening from, wherever you're watching from, go ahead and subscribe. That would be fantastic. And then take some time, go to marchordie.com, marchordie.com. You can find archived episodes of this show. You can also find information about me. Our store is there. Everything is there for you, so please go and check that out. My guest today is Saul Villanueva. Saul is a former United States Marine and former police officer. He tells his whole story. You'll hear that in just a second. But really tells the story of the life that he lived and the things that he did in the military, in combat, also in law enforcement, but then the process of moving forward on the other side of all that. Understanding how to take those steps forward, how to march when it would be easier to stay where he was, and had friends speak into his life, had other opportunities, really made some good decisions, and then had some moments where he kind of fell back, and then had some other people come into his life that helped to carry him forward. But he's going to talk about how he began to understand who God was, learned of the character of God and even the nature of sin and the world that we live in, understanding then the sovereignty of God, that God is in and over all, and how that allowed him to move beyond so much of the trauma that he had dealt with in his life. A wonderful, wonderful conversation. His testimony is powerful, and I'm very grateful for him. So please enjoy this conversation with Saul Villanueva. Saul, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation. I've heard your story a number of times, and we've known each other for quite a few years now. But I'm really excited to share that with others. You have a kind of a unique perspective on law enforcement, life after law enforcement, and kind of the process that you've gone through personally.
Yeah.
I think connects really well to a lot of people who are maybe asking questions, struggling and not sharing it, and even people who are at the end of a career in that transition period trying to figure out what to do next. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Let's start with kind of how you were raised and kind of leading up into the beginning of your career in law enforcement.
So it's kind of, how should I say, look, I was born Catholic. On the spiritual side, born into the Catholic Church, did, all the things that are required by the Catholic Church growing up, but never truly really understanding God, never had a relationship with Christ, didn't understand God, didn't understand sin, or to me, everything was black and white. It was either good or it was evil. And, if you did certain things, you were going to go to hell. If you did certain things or you did more good than bad, you're going to go to heaven. But
right.
Never truly understanding what that was. And so I grew up in the Bay Area of California, over in San Jose. And my dad's family was spread out between Redwood City and Oakland, San Carlos, all that area. So spent a lot of time in cities. My mom's side of the family is from the country, out towards, actually about 30 miles from San Miguel in Greenfield, King City area. So I grew up also spending half my time in the country, doing cattle, raising pigs, doing the whole 9 yards over there. So I really didn't fit in anywhere. So, we're talking 80s and 90s. I'm starting to age myself. Uh,
That's all right.
gangs were pretty big in San Jose. So, but I didn't fit into your typical mold of what Mexican gangs would want, right? I was too Mexican for one gang and not Mexican enough for the other
Right.
gang.
Right.
I wasn't from the motherland speaking Spanish. I do speak Spanish, but not with being from Mexico accent type of deal.
Right.
Uh, so I ended up having a lot of problems as soon as I got into middle school. I went from three different schools. I transferred or was forced to transfer from sixth grade, one school to another school in seventh grade, and then I ended up into continuation school for the end of seventh and eighth. Was not allowed back in the San Jose School District for high school, and ended up getting into a Catholic high school in Mountain View. But by that time, when I went to high school, like I was way behind the power curve of like kids who had grown up in private schools, and so I was always in this place of being in catch up. But I ended up meeting a coach for football who, and even till this day, like I don't know why he cared about me. And so much so, he was the first real person who would punish me for the things that I was doing.
Right.
So, like if I sagged my pants, I couldn't go to practice. He would make me run laps. If he caught me wearing any colors or anything, like he'd take me up into the wrestling room and we'd wrestle it out. So, like I always thank him for breaking me of that mentality.
Did you look at that as caring when it was happening? That he would care enough to, I don't know, hold you accountable? I won't say punish, but hold you accountable for those things? I mean, at the time, did you see it that way?
I don't think so. But I didn't. I also wasn't mad at him for it. Like I knew
Right.
what I was doing was wrong, and in this weird understanding of God, like I was wrong, so therefore I deserve to be punished.
Sure.
In my mind, right? So, like I just obeyed. You know, it was, I knew I was wrong.
Yeah.
We'll put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So from there, finished high school barely. Went to college for a couple of years, and then in 1999, joined the Marine Corps. So went to the Marine Corps from 99 to 2004, deployed twice, and then got out in 2004 and went into construction for about 3 years until 2007. And then in 2007, got into law enforcement, and that's where my career started there.
What I was going to ask you a couple things, I guess. What caused you to go into the Marine Corps? Was that you didn't have another, opportunity? Was that something you had always wanted to do? Why'd you make that decision? And then how did you, eventually decide to go into law enforcement? What were the kind of catalysts for those?
So when I was in college, my parents owned a Mexican restaurant. My dad's a mechanical engineer by trade, and he owned his own business, or still owns his own business. But on the side, they were also running a Mexican restaurant in San Jose. And so I was working at the restaurant, and I was working at another, it was kind of like a mechanical sales, industrial sales type of place, and going to college full time. And so one day I woke up and I was like, I'm not doing good at any of this. Like I was spread so thin. I'm not sleeping. Like I missed, I was really good at football at the time, and I missed tryouts, and it was just like, I was really frustrated by the time I was going to the Marine Corps, and I had two cousins that had already served in the Marine Corps. And I remember that, that's, as a child, that's like, I always looked up to them. They're older, a lot older than I am. And I remember thinking, man, if I could just do that. And one day I woke up and I said, well, it's either now or never. You know,
Yeah.
if I'm going to do the Marine Corps, it's going to be now, because I'm not a stranger to injuries playing, you know, football and everything else.
Right. Right.
So I just went and I did it.
Yeah.
I met the drill instructor, and I think a month and a half later, I was in boot camp.
Wow.
So if that, it was quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
And then you did your time in the Marine Corps, your deployments, and they got out, but you waited a while to go in law enforcement. So was that not part of the plan?
it was not. I hated law enforcement.
So
I'll
not
be
at
real
all.
honest. I know Mike is going to be like, "What is going on right now?" When he sees this. But no, I had a deep hate for law enforcement. I being that I came up with a lot of gang background.
Yeah.
Uh, I'd never had a positive contact with law enforcement at all.
Interesting.
So I really hated law enforcement. But during this time of being in construction, you know, there's not a lot of good influence there.
Yeah. Right. Right.
We're drinking a lot, doing a lot of things probably shouldn't have been doing. And I was back then, post traumatic stress, all these other things weren't a big deal. They
Yeah.
weren't like
Yeah.
anything that anybody talked about.
Yeah.
And I knew I was suffering because I would drink enough to fall asleep, but then I couldn't sleep. And it was this crazy cycle I was going through of this lack of sleep and just constantly stressed out and anxiety and it's like paranoia, just all kinds of weird things. And so one day I ended up at my cousin's house in Greenfield, and we started talking, and he had that man to man, heart to heart talk with me.
Yeah.
And he told me straight up, he goes, you know, when you came back from Afghanistan, you didn't leave the war. You know, you may have left the country, but you're still fighting. And you fight. And by this time I had been through, I think, 6 construction companies for either being let go or conflict with management.
Yeah.
And so that aggressiveness was still very much a part of who I was. And so my cousin told me, he's like, you need to fight another war. You need to either go back to Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever. You need to get back in the Marine Corps, or you need to find somewhere else where you can use these skills because they're not working in the civilian world for you.
That's funny advice, right? Yeah, I expected you to say, and he told me I need to get over it, or I need to get help, or I need to. No. Go find somewhere else you can fight. You can fight. Didn't even try to fix it. Just redirect it.
His background is, you know, he's in the CDC and he's one of their SWAT instructors, sniper, and all kinds of other stuff, right? So that's when he told me, he's like, you know, we've got a war going on right here with the gangs.
Yeah.
Why don't you apply to the sheriff's office? And in my head, I was like, dude, you're a genius. Like, why didn't I ever think about that? And he said, yeah, you can go to war every single day and sleep in your own bed at night. And I was just like, dude, okay.
Yeah.
So then I applied from everywhere from San Mateo down south to Salinas. And I was hired first with Monterey County in 2007. And that was when the truth of what law enforcement does hit me in the first day. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. This is what we do. I actually wanted to quit the first day they put me in the jail. And I was like, you cannot be kidding. This is what you do for a living. It was pretty rough. I lasted about 9 months in the jail working there after the academy. And I applied to go to patrol. Back then, it was really uncommon for you not to finish your year on probation. Yeah. And so they made me sign paperwork saying that there was no requirement for them to continue my employment if I failed patrol training. And I said, well, I ain't coming back. If I don't pass patrol training, I'm not coming back to the jail. I can't.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, right.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. There are a lot of sheriff's departments don't do that anymore, but many do. Can you talk about that? Because, or for people that aren't familiar with that you work for the sheriff's department, but you are a prison guard for a while. I mean, which is, to me, has always been really weird.
It is weird because you go through the academy, you're doing all this high speed stuff, you're driving, you're doing all those tactical things, and then all of a sudden you're in the jail and you're like,
Yeah,
here's your food, here's your meds.
yeah,
And not to say that's not important work. It is, and I know a lot of deputies who have spent their entire careers in the
yeah,
jail and they
sure,
love it. That's their thing. For me, I was always working outside. And so for me to be confined in a jail for an indefinite
yeah,
amount of time was I couldn't handle that
yeah,
thought process. And for those that don't know, the jail is actually a pretty violent place.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, you do intake on Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. I mean, people come in swinging. Like we got a whole Sally Port full of cops trying to bring in their in custodies, and when you pull them out of the car, you never know what you're going to get, and they're
yeah,
fighting all
right,
the way through intake, and it's you got everything, so
yeah,
it's pretty wild
yeah.
experience.
When I was a
Mhm.
college student, I was a criminal justice major, and we had to do an internship. So I did 2 weeks of interning with just 2 weeks, but interning with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. And one of the things they had me do was go hang out at. We have a big jail here in Riverside
Uh-huh.
County, and go hang out not only at the jail but in the intake. And I was like, so I was like 19 years old. I didn't know anything, and
Mhm.
I'm watching. I was like, holy cow! I don't ever want to be a part of this in my life. But yeah, it was one of the
Yeah,
craziest things I'd ever seen. I mean, people work there and do that all the time, but as a teenager, I was like, this is insane.
yeah,
Yeah, it's crazy.
but that's
Yeah,
also the first time where like, and I don't know if you're familiar with Salinas, but Salinas is um, one of the tougher areas around here, and those gangsters are on a different level. Like we
yeah,
have,
sure.
they're segregated. They have their own pods. They don't. It's it's a little bit different than anything I had ever experienced up until that point.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of learning that I did within the jail, which was really really good. A lot of confidence building, a lot of getting to know the structure of how street gangs ran
yeah,
compared to like mafias and all the other stuff that's involved. And
yeah,
so when I went to patrol, that was a very big, even though I didn't spend a lot of time there, that was a really big help
yeah.
being confident on patrol. Mm-hmm.
You how many years were you on patrol, or were you not on patrol, but were you a police officer?
12 years.
12 years, and there were. I mean, you did a lot while you were there, but there were a couple of incidents I think that eventually just knowing your story would push you to the point where you had to make some big life decisions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
eventually would leave law enforcement. Um, Talk about a couple of those incidents, and I have when I hear your story and think about you, I always think about that part of your story where you talk about a friend of yours who said we need to talk, right? And you were working, and he confronted you, and that was toward the end of that time, and pushed you into getting help. But what were some of the events that led up to the point where you're like, I can't just keep fighting another war. I can't just keep pushing this down. I can't just keep avoiding the fact that I'm struggling. I need to get help. What were some of those events that pushed you there?
So I think my mentality going into the sheriff's office was that I had to keep. I took the Marine Corps with me, where like
Yeah.
you're gonna pay to play, and don't dwell on these things because you're gonna get your partner killed, or you're gonna get yourself killed for that matter.
Mm,
So I took that with me into the sheriff's office, and I carried the sheriff's office or the Marine Corps into the sheriff's office, and then that jail experience out onto patrol.
yeah.
And we had some. It was his name was Adrian. Adrian and I, at the time, we were both. I came out into patrol training right when he was finishing, so we didn't really know each other, but we were going to a lot of. We were experiencing a lot of the same calls. Um,
Yeah.
so we had uh, what's known as the Soledad bus crash. which I think it was 7 or 9 people died in that bus crash, and there was
Wow.
I don't know how many injuries, probably like 20 something injuries. So it was a mass, like one of the bigger mass casualties in our history. Uh, we we went through a lot of very violent calls for service, to the point where the sheriff's office actually brought us in to see a psychologist, because they said that it wasn't normal for 2 deputies to go through this many uh, traumatic calls for service, and they were starting to be concerned. So 3 weeks off of training, I end up in a shooting, and he was on the call for service. So during that shooting, he had gotten. I was being run down by the suspect in the van. I opened fire right when my partner was getting out of, or Adrian was getting out of the patrol car, and the van smashed right into him, sending his head into the windshield. And I remember the van kept going, and I went to check on Adrian for his injuries, and he was just yelling at me, "Go get him, go get him." You know, the suspects are, they're sergeants in a pursuit with the suspects. And I was like, dude, I can't leave you. Like, I can't leave a partner behind. Like, I can't leave a brother behind. And so I struggled with that for a long time. And I remember him specifically telling me that our brotherhood was literally born under fire, and he would be my brother forever. And at the time, I was just like, okay, dude, whatever, you know, like, we were just in a shooting together. Okay, you know, I didn't take it. I guess I didn't understand how much he meant that. And so we got transferred to the King City substation shortly thereafter. And we went to a call for service out in San Ardo, which is the town just up from San Miguel. And when we got there, it was my partner, Nick, and we were heading to 2 brothers. One of them had been shooting at the other brother. And when we got there, one brother flagged us down. We were a little bit of ways away from the residence or the address that we had been given. And so we should have been safe. We should have been a safe distance.
Yep.
And so Nick contacts the brother, and next thing you know, the other brother comes out with a 357 and points it at my face and says, "You're not going to take me alive." And I was, at that moment, I had been in the trunk getting my M16 out. I just put a mag in, and as I was looking up, I was charging it, and I see this gun, and it's that realization that you got caught slipping. And so I started raising up my AR to basically in a race to see who's going to shoot who first. And as I was raising my AR, he takes the gun and points it to his own head. And, you know, we had to switch gears from me shooting this guy to being in a barricaded negotiation situation. Wow. So we went through that, and then we had gone to another call for service where we were in briefing when the tones came out, and there was a vehicle crash out in the middle of on private property, but in the middle of fields. And when we got there, a child had been on a very big ranch four-wheeler, and he had lost control and took a grape stake under his chin and went through his head.
Good.
And not to say that I was okay with it, but that the traumatic experience wasn't the child, but it was the parents when they arrived on scene.
Sure.
And you know, having to deal with the father wanting to see and take the body, and the mother who's just like, to this day, I hear her screaming. So, just constant, incidents.
I think that's one of the things that, you know, when you work in our programs, and and you have the experience of both, you know, combat experience and then I mean, it's all combat experience, I guess, but
Mm-hmm.
military combat experience and then law enforcement. And then that's one of the distinctions always made for those who are combat veterans, as in they went to Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere else. You have that traumatic event, but then you come home and you're separated from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not there tomorrow morning when you wake up. And hopefully you can get help and you have time and distance and people around you that can help you process that. That was a thing that happened over there. But in law enforcement, for so many that are, wearing the uniform, it's exactly what you just described, right? It's you have these events and then you go home and
Mm-hmm.
then you get up tomorrow morning and you put on a clean uniform and you go do it again. And then, maybe you go several days or several weeks without a major incident, but then something else happens. And then, the way it's described in our program is just keep pushing that down on the pack, right? Just keep pushing it down and pushing it down and never addressing it, never dealing with it.
Yeah.
Is that pretty common for just the law enforcement community? You just, again, the things you just said, like those couple of things you just mentioned, right? And you dealt with so many other things, but just those couple of things. If that happened one time, if a normal person saw any of those, just one of those in a lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
that would be probably the defining moment of their lifetime. But for you, and I'm guessing others in law enforcement, that's not a normal day for sure, but not necessarily an unusual situation.
For us, there was a time in like 2010 through 9 and 10, maybe through 13 and 14, where there were shootings almost every weekend. It's
Yeah,
somewhere in our county. It was a very violent time. And what I tried to explain, especially to civilians who didn't understand, why a deputy or a cop would have an attitude with them on the next call for service was
right.
like, we literally deal with the worst day of your life every day we put on a uniform.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
there's a reason why so many people have a negative association with law enforcement, is because we're the ones that showed up when you're having the worst day of your life, and so
yeah,
that
yeah,
memory is always connected there. Um, but for when it comes to like traumatic events, the difference between the veterans and the first responders is, I can tell you the day one of my Marines died. I could tell you exactly where it was. I can
yeah,
relive the entire incident. I remember exactly what time it was looking at my watch. I remember
yeah,
the smell of the fuel on the flight deck. I remember everything about that incident, the conversations, the tones. Like, I remember all of it, and it replays in my mind. But I couldn't tell you how many shootings I've been to. I can't
yeah,
tell you how many rape investigations I've done. I can't tell you how many child crimes I've investigated. Um, how many people like have hung themselves. I have no idea.
yeah,
And so with with law enforcement, I think what happens is that almost like if your brain's a computer, the buffer fills up, and next thing you know, it's all spilling out and you can't control it.
yeah,
Is for me, when it finally happened, uh, I remember it was Adrian who was telling me that you're not responding to stimulus the way you should be. Like, on an easy call for service or like a traffic stop, I'd be tearing up and
yeah,
whatever. And then on a barking dog call, and I'm just flying off the handle. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's not like it's almost like there's a disconnection that happens in the brain
yeah.
where it's like the stimulus is not jiving with uh, your reaction to it. So
When you think about, there are a lot of people that will go through an entire career in law enforcement, and some will have a moment or moments where they can't do it anymore. Some retire and then don't handle that very well, and so that's a big issue in the law enforcement community. Self harm is a big deal in the law enforcement community. So you have that, right? But then you have other people who go through 20 years or more, and they seem to have been pretty well adjusted. They move on with their lives. They do their thing. What do you see as kind of, and I'm sure it's not one thing, right? We're all different. We're all wired different. But what do you see as kind of a critical difference or peace between those who really struggle and those who, I won't say won't, but are able to move beyond the incidents that they've been a part of and move forward in their lives? What is the thing, if there is a thing? And there probably isn't one thing, but
if I look back right now and say, if I understood the Bible, the Word of God,
yeah,
the way I do now, I would be very successful in law enforcement. Like, especially God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, I would place the appropriate responsibility where it belonged, right? Like, I do have a responsibility to respond to my call for service. I would have a responsibility to do the best that I can. I have a responsibility to, enforce the law the best that I can. But the outcome is God's. And, when that was first explained to me, I was shocked. I was blown away. Like, wait a minute. All the people that I've done CPR on and that passed away, that wasn't my fault. And I remember Pastor Jesse Howard, he walked me through a discipleship for about 2 years. And when we hit sovereignty, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And this weight of like things that were not my responsibility to carry was gone. And that was, I think that was the moment I can say that the symptoms of post-traumatic stress was like gone. It was the understanding of where that should be placed.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
I think for a lot of people, a lot of people do jujitsu, try to wear themselves out. They, try to eat healthy and do a lot of different things. But I think to do law enforcement in a healthy way, you need to understand that what we're dealing with is sin. And once there's an understanding of sin, then you don't have to hate people anymore, right? And you don't have to look at it. You can have compassion for the people on the worst day of their lives, and it doesn't have to be like this giant burden anymore of that you're having to carry another gunshot victim or another suicide victim or another car crash or whatever. Like, you can start responding to these things correctly and appropriately for that matter.
Yeah, that's good. Man, that's so good. That's so helpful. For you to get to that place though, and I kind of took you off course, but going back, what was the moment where you said, okay, I need to get help? And again, I know your story, so it was more like someone said you need to get help, right? But what was the catalyst, like the final straw that caused you to go, all right, I've got to get some help for this?
As I look back, I think it was a lot of things. And I think that, that's one have been the actual blessing and hardship of giving testimony, because I think it was for me, it was almost like a multi-pronged attack on what was happening in my life. So at the time, this is 2018 now, gone through all these incidents. I've already been to the VA, diagnosed with sleeping disorder and sleep apnea and post-traumatic stress and whatever else they wanted to diagnose me with. And now my marriage is falling apart. And I've got 2 kids that were really young. And in 2015, I had been significantly injured on a call for service. I walked away with 5 herniated discs in my back, injuries to my leg and whatever else. In 2016, I would be taken off duty to have thoracic spine surgery, and they ended up removing a disc and putting a plate and screws and the whole 9 yards. From there, I fought to get back to service, full duty. I was able to get back in November, and I continued working full duty. Even went to the public safety dive team, and I kept adding stress as things at home were falling apart. We had an incident where one of our deputies, his wife had committed suicide, and the department was no longer. They were taking a very hard stance on what was happening within the department. So it came out that my ex and I were having a lot of problems at home. Adrian had somehow been called up by the sheriff to, figure out, what do we do? Uh, what do we do with him? And Adrian said, I know of this place, Mighty Oaks. And so Adrian gave me a call and he's like, hey, what are you doing? I said, nothing. I'm just out here looking for gangsters. Like, it's Salinas. What else am I going to do? Right. And so he goes, well, go find a shady spot to park. We need to talk. And so at the time he had teenage daughters, and I totally thought that it was going to be me listening to him. Right.
Yeah.
And so he calls me up, or I call him back, and I'm sitting under this nice tree in like one of our more dangerous areas. And I was like, what's up, dude? And he's like, well, tell me what's going on. I was like, you called me. Like, I'm just out here working. I don't know what you want.
Yeah.
And so he's like, no, tell me what's going on. I'm lost, bro. Like, I don't know. And it's like, tell me what's going on at home. And I was like, why? He's like, because the sheriff knows.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, dang. So I spilled the story of everything that was taking place at home. And it was one of those times where it's just like I had to be really honest about, things that were taking place, the hardships. And it's not like he didn't know. We were working. It was like real common to work 16 hours a day. And then, Salinas from my house is 105 miles. So I was commuting there and back every day. Wow. So he says, I'm going to have you sent to Mighty Oaks. And I said, what? No, I'm not going anywhere. And he says, no, you're going to go. And I was like, what is Mighty Oaks? He's like, I'm going to send you a link to a video. It was Chad's video. I am second.
Yeah.
And this application, you're going to fill it out. I've already got you slaughtered. You're going to go for a week and a half. I said, dude, I've got babies at home. Like, there's no way I'm going anywhere. And he's like, no, you have to go. You're going to go. It's already been cleared. It's on the schedule. You're going. And he goes, as a matter of fact, it's only about 45 minutes away from your house. When you get there, you need to promise me that you're going to stay. And I was like, no. So we commenced this big old argument for I don't know how long. And I was like, no, I'm not going. Never heard of Mighty Oaks. I have no need for, a hug vets and, kumbaya, feel sorry for me, whatever. Like, I'm hardcore. I work Salinas. Like, I'm staying here. And so he pulls out the brother card and he says, promise me as a brother when you get there, you'll stay. I was like, man, don't ask me of this. And he's like, promise me. And I was like, man. All right. So I went. And the first person I met was John Davis at Skyrose.
Yeah.
And John walks up to me. He's like, hey, I'm John, blah, blah. And, what's your name? I was like, I'm Saul. He's like, really? And he's like, what's your middle name? He's like, David. Like, your parents not like you? Because they got a lot of issues, dude. You are in the right place. And at the time, I'd never read the story. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I was like, okay, whatever, dude. And so, I give testimony. I'm ashamed to say it. But when I got up on an icebreaker, I said, I don't want to be here. I was voluntold here. I was forced to be here. I promised my brother I would stay, but I don't want to be here. And it was the first day of a radical change in trajectory in my life. And I can honestly say it was the beginning of like the best week I've ever had.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Man, that's incredible. it's crazy. You can be in such a mess, right?
Mhm.
and just like so broken, like, nah, I'm fine. I don't need help. And sometimes it takes people on the outside going, no, you need to go and find some
Mhm.
help. Um, was there a moment during that week when you were there that, it clicked, like this is okay. This is what I need to do. You said you were raised Catholic and went to Catholic school. Um, is that where faith made sense to you and a relationship with Christ made sense to you, or what was that kind of moment where you went, oh, now I get it?
So, you know, God in his infinite wisdom, right? I think
Yeah.
put me in law enforcement for a lot of reasons, but a specific reason was to, like, I understood penal code, I understood law, and I
Mm,
understood the need to understand not just that there is a law, but the elements of that law and what specifically needs to happen for that law to be violated. And so I was at Mighty Oaks, and I'm sitting there listening to these instructors, and there's scripture on the slides, and I was like, I've never seen this. What? I'm 40 years old. Why have I never seen this?
yeah.
Like how? And then I remember because I talked to John Hintz later. I was like, how could it be that I could be born into a church, into a Catholic church, and never seen any of this? I've never heard this, especially with forgiveness. Like where I come from, you just
Yeah.
need to forgive yourself. And then all of a sudden, I was like, wait a minute. And so I remember, I probably should apologize to John because John was ended up being Davis. He ended up being my team leader. Um, I remember dominating the breakouts, and I did not make it easy for him. I was hammering him because I wanted answers. I was like, if you're gonna put scripture up there, then I need answers. And where do I stand with this?
Yeah.
And so I remember, uh, I think it was our common enemy. It's either marriage or our common enemy or something. I asked John a really hard question, and he looked at me. He's like, I don't know, but I'll tell you what. Let me go talk to Bill,
Hmm.
and we'll come up with an answer. And he came back the next breakout, and he had a biblical answer for me. And that's when I was just like, you have got to be kidding me.
Hmm.
Like how have I, after 40 years of life, never once opened this book, but I can tell you what's in the penal code. I can tell you
Yeah.
what's in the vehicle code. I can tell you what's welfare and institution, business professions. I can tell you those codes,
Yeah.
but I've never opened the Bible. And to me, that understanding was so ridiculous that it was a shock. Like I remember I went home after Legacy or back to the year after Legacy, and I didn't sleep all night. I was like, I'm in trouble.
Hmm.
Is like my thought process towards the end of that week is I'm in a lot of trouble because now I was starting to have a correct, well, not even then. I was starting to have an understanding of sin. And that to me, like, was very, very scary because up until that point, as law enforcement, I was the one who determined right and wrong.
Right.
I was the one capable of taking your freedom away and putting you in jail. Like, and all of a sudden you're telling me that there's something else who holds us accountable.
Right.
There's a God out there who actually does care. Um,
Right.
that that information to me was a complete shock. I had never thought or even considered that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then how did you respond to that? So, obviously you can't, I guess, wallow in the I'm in trouble, right? That
Mm-hmm.
has to lead to a decision. So how do you respond to that?
So they told us that that evening before we left, they told us that we were going to be able to have the opportunity to give a testimony on Thursday. And I was like, "There's no way you guys," because I have always had the mentality that you're not even qualified to hear what I have to say. you've never been overseas. You've never done
I
the things
see.
that
Yeah.
I've done. You've never suffered the way I've suffered.
Right.
And so therefore you don't even have the right to hear what I have to say. And I I think it was midway through testimonies when I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. And I got up there, and I know there's a 20-minute time frame. I must have been up there for like 45 minutes. And I let it out, and it was and it wasn't even just like, it was the weirdest experience I've ever had, where it was just a rush of information, like vomiting at the mouth, just all this stuff, this traumatic things that I've been holding in, all came out all at once, all at the same time. And to this day, I don't even know if it made sense to a lot of people, because I was just coming
Yeah.
at them.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was JJ who was like, you got your 5 minutes left, and Bill just puts his arm down, and they just let me go. And I know Kevin still makes fun of me, but shortly thereafter, the testimony, I sat back down on the couch and I fell asleep. And it was the first time actually sleeping that I could remember in years.
Yeah.
Like, they woke me up for dinner. He's like, "Hey, dude, you can come for dinner or what?" And I probably was snoring. Like, I don't know, but yeah, I fell asleep right after. But once that happened, I remember thinking, like, the rage is gone. Like, I went back to the year, and it was like, there's this weird, um, I guess, emptiness. I mean, I've been so used to just operating off of anger and hate, and just having that be like a fuel source, that I was exhausted.
Yeah.
The next day, Kevin gave up and gave the class on baptisms, and he asked if anybody was going to get a baptism. I was like, and I didn't even believe, like, I was raising my hand, like, what am I doing? I've already been baptized. Like, I don't know why I need another baptism, but I felt this insane pull to be baptized. And so John and Robert Cale, they baptized me over there at Skyros, and I think over the course of the next 8 or 9 months, I started to crash really, really bad. It wasn't like this uphill mountaintop experience. I went from where I was, and just crashed straight, like nosedive straight down. I went to, as soon as I left, I was served with divorce papers about 2 weeks later. I had already committed to go into a public safety dive school in LA County. And I spent 2 months there while going to this intense dive school. I would go home on the weekends, move my stuff out of the house, have the kids for my custody time, and drive back to LA, be there for class. And I did that for 2 months. Went to boat school after that in Arizona, and came back. And I remember, like, I was viewing things that I was doing differently. Like cussing, for some reason, cussing became bad. I don't know why cussing became bad. Like, it was this weird thing, but one day I just stopped cussing, and it wasn't intentional. It wasn't like, oh, I need to stop cussing. It was just like, I just stopped cussing because it was bad.
Yeah.
Like, everything I was doing, like, was starting to be looked at through scripture, and I started having a real bad issue with that. And I started having really bad panic attacks. And so I think it was the end of the year 2018 when Mighty Oaks had one of their first public graduations at ABC. And uh, I was heading to work Sunday morning, and I was on 101. I was just past San Miguel, and I started having a massive panic attack. I thought I was having a heart attack, and I had come to the realization that I forgot my gun at home. And I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I forgot my gun at home, and I forgot something else from my uniform at home. And it was part of our rules that on dive team, if you make more than 2 mistakes, your head's not in the game. You need to not be there.
Yeah.
And so I called my sergeant and I was like, hey, I'm not going to make it today. Put me out sick. And I made a U-turn literally in the middle of the freeway, made a U-turn and went back home, changed out and went to church. And I don't know why I was going to church. I hadn't been to church since, I don't know. I don't remember. But I went to church and I sat in the back of ABC on the right-hand side and I was having this panic attack. And next thing you know, this is back when I think it's Tom Farrell. Was still pastor.
Tom, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they're doing the announcements. And I remember praying like hard for the first time. I remember praying like, I can't do this anymore. And like, God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it, but I can't do this. And like, I looked up and there's the announcement for Mighty Oaks. So I was like, man, God answers prayers fast. Like, man, I didn't even have to wait. So then I went to the graduation and I'd never been a team leader. I'd never seen like the behind the scenes. I didn't know how exhausted they were. I just went and I grabbed Bill and I started telling him what's going on. Like, hey, I'm getting a divorce. I'm doing this. I just been notified of, this medical retirement that was coming down the pipeline for me.
Yeah.
Like, everything's just failing. And like, I don't know what to do about it. And John Davis had just walked up and he's overhearing this and he's like, dude, retire. Yeah. You've done enough. Like, be done with this. And I was like, dude, I can't do, like, I've got 2 babies at home. Like I have to provide for them. I can't do this. I was just, the excuses were flowing out. And Robert walks up and he gives me a big bear hug from behind. And he, he says hi and he introduces me to a guy named John Rogers. And he says, hey, do you know John? I said, no, I don't know him. He goes, well, you 2 exchange numbers because you guys are fixing to start an outpost. And I, hey, John, how you doing? Blah, blah. And we both look at each other like, what's an outpost?
Yeah.
So we called back at Robert. It's like, hey, Robert, what's an outpost? He's like, you 2 are Marines. Make it happen. And
that sounds right.
Right. And so, we linked up. We had about 4 when we started. And I remember thinking, by what right do I have at all to teach anybody anything about the Bible? I have no right. I have no right to teach anybody. And so the funny thing is, when you start studying the Bible, God's not afraid of your questions.
Right. That's right.
And the answer's there. And so I started to think, well, I've done briefings. I've done all these things at the sheriff's office. I've done all these things in the Marine Corps. And if, God is calling me to do this outpost thing, then I need to start learning the Bible. And over the next couple of years, I ended up running into Pastor John Mark.
Yeah.
And he set me up with Pastor Jesse Howard. He's now at Carlsbad Community Church. And he ran me through a discipleship for 2 years. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that's ever happened to me, where I was able to ask him specific questions and he would run me through the Bible and what God had to say about these things. And and the answers had always been there, which
Right.
is
Right.
which is amazing to me. Like they've been there for thousands of years. Like I just had to open the Bible, and so during this time, it taught me like how to study the Bible and how to seek answers that I'm looking for and put them into context for that the writers were writing for the people who were
Yep.
hearing these things.
Yep.
So that was really really important for my growth in being Christian.
Yeah.
So mhm.
Um, man, and then God continues to use you as you serve, even through our programs, and it's funny how you surrender yourself to the Lord, right, and then He opens up doors and opportunities to serve. If you could give, maybe one piece of advice or make one statement to someone, um, coming out of the law enforcement, maybe they're in law enforcement right now, maybe they're coming out of a law enforcement career, but they're struggling in similar ways to you. You could give them one piece of advice, one thing: you need to do this. This is how you need to think. This is what you need to consider. Um, Other than go to Mighty Oaks, right? We'll open the door for that too. But other than that, it's just you and him, you and her sitting down, and they're struggling. What would you tell them?
We need to understand sin. We
Hmm.
need to understand sin, human sin. We need to stop looking at this as the devil made me do this. And we need to understand what God says about sin from the Bible's point of view. Because
Yeah.
when I teach our common enemy, I'll tell them like, look, you go to a call for service, and then you're going to do what? You're going to get there. You're going to secure the scene. You're going to go ahead and document everything. You're going to take pictures. You're going to take video. You're going to talk to victims, witnesses, arrest suspects. You're going to write a report, and that report's going to go away. And a year from now, 2 years from now, you're going to get called up by some district attorney and subpoena you for court. And then you're going to have to go through this thing, memorize everything because some defense
Hmm.
attorney is going to want to trip you up on some comma. And you, this whole time, this whole span in between, you've submitted hundreds of reports since then.
Right.
And so you're in this constant exposure to human sin. At what at what point do we become at what point do we be contaminated by other people's sin? And that has an effect on us. If we're
Yeah.
going to the worst day of somebody else's life, every day we put on the uniform, at some point that's going to have an effect. And
Yeah.
if we don't understand sin, if we don't understand God, if we don't understand, God's justice, God's sovereignty, God's grace, His mercy, if we don't understand God's character, we need to become students of the Bible, students of God, and to understand who God is. And I think once we do that, even a basic understanding,
Yeah.
things can get put into perspective, and we
It's good.
can become healthy uh, first responders serving a community with an ability to be compassionate while at the same time enforcing law.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Man, that's good. Man, Saul, that's great. I appreciate you sharing this and all the work you do to help men and women who have served or are serving. Really appreciate it. And thank you for your friendship, and thanks for talking to us today.
no, I appreciate the opportunity and always here for you. So love it. Thank you.
Very grateful for Saul and man, for him just being so transparent and honest and sharing with us. Uh, all of us, whether we've come from a background like his or not, I think we can see ourselves in that. Those moments of difficulty and trauma and trial. There are some victories, there are some defeats, but how do we move forward? How do we march when it would be easier to stay where we are and die? And Saul concluded, he said, we need to understand the character of God. There is sin, that is the nature of sin in the world that we live in. But then there is understanding who God is and understanding His character. And when we get that figured out, it changes everything for us. So very grateful for that. If you are interested in the Mighty Oaks Foundation, the Mighty Oaks programs, that's what we do. Go to mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org. You can learn more about the work that we do with veterans, active duty service members, and first responders, as well as their spouses. There is a place to apply there if you fall into one of those categories. Also, other opportunities to support. And again, if you are interested in attending and you fall into that category, no cost to you as a student, no cost to travel to the locations. We have a number of locations across the country, and we'd like to help you get there. So please check that out. When you're done listening to this, please jump over to Life Audio, lifeaudio.com, and you'll find other great faith-focused podcasts there. Cover a range of topics, great hosts, and conversations there for you. So please go and check that out. I will end today as I do every day. When you find yourself stuck, there are obstacles, traumas, trials, difficulties in life. When you find yourself in that place where it seems like the world around you is falling apart, what are you going to do? You only have two options, but you have to decide. Are you going to stay where you are and die, or will you march? The choice is always yours.